Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello, happy
Hi.
Wednesday.
It is Wednesday, November 16th, 2:05 p.m. We are on live in 10 minutes. I see Anthony, and I know Lewis is coming aboard.
I am here.
I guess let me change this. I am not here under Rod Onyx.
Is it Anthony or Isaiah?
Anthony?
Isaiah.
Isaiah, okay.
And I was going to introduce you all.
Okay, great.
You can still do that.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
How's everyone going? Pretty good?
Good.
Yes.
All right, so looks like the last session has ended, so this one gets started at 2:15.
Yes.
We'll kind of wait until people trickle in, and then you can get started at 2:15. Does anyone have any presentations or anything that they'd like to share?
No, not for this section.
Okay. Just checking. Yeah, there isn't a chat in this session, but there is a Q&A, I believe. So
I see chat. I see the chat function down at the bottom of the screen.
Okay. All right, so there is a chat. Got it. Okay. I'm doing two sessions at once, so you gotta excuse me for that one.
And are we letting people in right now?
Yes. People can come in, but we didn't set up a waiting room. So yeah, they're just gonna come right in. So don't say anything that you don't want anyone to hear.
Okay.
All right. Hot mic.
So everyone, this is Isaiah. This is our fellow speakers today, Rod Onyx, aka Rod.
Actually, other way around. And I'm gonna ask if folks can, while you're waiting, can folks please mute your microphones?
So she does go see the neurosurgeon.
So sorry, as I was saying, Rod McCoy, aka Rod Onyx. It's usually, depending on the context, it's usually the other way around. So
and then
I
was gonna say our fabulous host for today, the one and only Terrell Long.
Hello.
So Isaiah, this is the first time I've seen you on camera.
Really?
Yeah, this is the first time.
So I feel like I've seen Lewis so many times. I feel like Lewis's first time seeing me, I'm like, whoa, that's wild.
So Isaiah is from Seattle, Washington. I think born and raised, right?
Right.
One of the few.
Very few I'm finding out in the area.
and we're starting exactly on time at 2:15, correct?
We can. If we want to give folks a few minutes, I'm fine with that too.
Yeah, you can if you want to. Both of the previous sessions already ended, so
okay.
This is kind of a little reprieve for folks, and they can get started. You can get started at 2:15 if you like.
Gotcha.
Everybody looks good. Terrell is in his mansion.
Child.
You need to claim that.
I did not claim it. I did not claim it.
I'm going to say claim it. Even if the decor would be different, don't be afraid to claim it if that's what you want.
Absolutely. I was just going to say that I do have a slight little cold, so just bear with me for today's session.
You're good.
Well, if you choose to play that baby grand back there at any time, I'm willing to listen.
Right.
You know what? I used to play piano for about 7 years when I was younger, but all those muscle memory has very much depleted since then. But I don't mind hitting a key for you if that's what you want.
Okay, well, hit a key and we'll sing.
Right. I'll just hit a key and we can just start from
Hit
there.
hit a key and we'll sing, and we'll see how it goes after that.
Terrell, I don't know if you're talking, Terrell. You're on mute.
Oh, that was like a self-talk.
No, okay. I'm about to put myself on mute until we're ready.
Yeah, I was just looking at the participants. I think they said there was a question and answer function on this, but I still don't see that. I just see the chat.
Now, what I can do is through Hoover, there are some questions there.
Okay.
So if I can access them while we're waiting, let me see if I can forward them to you. Are you on Hoover, Terrell?
Yeah, I do have the app on my
Actually,
cell phone.
Yeah, I think if you let me know, because I think if you look under our presentation, you should see Q&A, some questions. One of which in particular has already got me like, wow, we want to go there.
So let me click on. I think I just see 2 questions. Is that the same thing as you see?
Let me just double check. I was trying to talk this up on Facebook. But let me join you in Hoover. Yep, the first one I really like. I'm not quite sure what that second question is, but the first one I think is, I definitely want to tackle that one. Or let me rephrase that. I think I have some thoughts around that.
Absolutely.
I have some thoughts. And on that note, let me go mute until we're ready to begin.
Okay, and I will do the same. Thank you everyone for your patience. All right, the time is now 2:15. So I believe that is our cue to get started. So hello and welcome 2022 International Conference on Stigma attendees. Thank you all for joining our next session titled Beyond the Barbershop, a conversation on men, sex, sexuality, and stigma. My name is Terrell Long, and I'm an organizational healthcare consultant for all of your health marketing and program evaluation needs. My pronouns are he, him, and they, them, and I'm thrilled to be your moderator for today's session. I am joined by an esteemed panel of men who I would ask to introduce themselves before we dive into today's topic. Fellas? And I can push it over to Rod to go first, and we'll just popcorn it. How about that?
If I must. All right. Well, first of all, Lewis, stop it. First of all, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rodney McCoy, and some of you may also know me as Rod Onyx. I'm very happy and delighted to be here. My current professional, gig is serving as a consultant for Nova Salute in Northern Virginia. Another gig that I have coming up that I'm very excited about is as research assistant at Us Helping Us that starts on World AIDS Day. And even though I talked about recent work, I am not new to HIV prevention. I have been in HIV prevention since I was 18 years old. I'm currently 55. So I have a wealth of knowledge, experience that I love sharing, and also lived experience as someone living with HIV, I like to say HIV living with me because I was here first. I also talk about, again, what it's like to be a gay/queer African-American in public health, also living with HIV. So those are just some of the perspectives that I bring to the session today. And I'm again, very thankful for everyone who has come into the room, who is coming into the room, and buckle up because we're going to have some really wonderful, awesome, and real conversations. So thank you.
So I'll go next. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Again, I echo all of Rod and Terrell's sentiments. My name is Louis Shackelford. I am an external relations project manager at the HIV Vaccines Trials Network. I have been in HIV research on the community engagement side for about 13 years. And so I really appreciate spaces like this where we can get together as community members, as family, as siblings, and really talk and dig down into the things that matter most to us. So I appreciate the space. I use he, him pronouns. And I also want to let it be known that I identify as a cisgender heterosexual man, so cishet Black man. And so I'm really interested to see the conversation that we're going to have today and hear all of our unique perspectives. And so with that, I'll turn it over to our final speaker, Isaiah Anthony, to introduce himself.
Make sure I take myself off mute so you all can hear. What's up, everybody? My name is Isaiah Anthony. I am from Seattle, Washington, born and raised. A lot of my background and my study comes in healthcare in many, many forms. So that's maternal wellness, paternal wellness, that is not only just in birth work, but in navigating like youth advocacy and their access to their gender and their care, and navigating those systems. I went to school for and tried to figure out how to marry my passions of architecture and my passion for healthcare, and ended up figuring out wellness was a really great way to do that. And so defining and building a company that centers itself around wellness and total wellness and what that looks like. That doesn't mean nutrition, that doesn't mean fitness, but what would it take for us to be a well society, a well culture, and how do we have that permeate? Starting with these conversations and kind of where are we coming from? How do we connect? How do we exist together? And how do we exist forward? So I'm really excited to speak with you all today.
Thank you all for those introductions. Wow. Expanding from the topic of today's session, especially for those who are just joining us, our goal is to dive into a conversation on how stigma impacts men of different lived experiences in the Black community. As noted, our panel is comprised of Black men identified as transmasculine, queer, same-gender loving, gender nonconforming or non-binary, and cisgender heterosexual. Our discussion will focus on sexuality, sex, and societal expectations from our unique perspectives. We want this to serve as a collaborative space to examine how dismantling privilege while developing a sexually liberated mindset is necessary to confront and eradicate sex and gender-based stigmas. So let's get started. I think the title, Beyond the Barbershop, is very unique and telling for a discussion on masculinity, identity, and sex. Barbershops, from my upbringing, kind of served as a strong focal point of what communicative masculine identity would entail. From a more personal lens, that would look like, the guys from the local community coming to get a haircut at that time for what would be like $10. I don't know about nowadays, but to discuss different topics regarding, the game, to get relationship advice or just to learn. So the idea of having a safe space for men to talk about their lives, explore their identities as men, and gain support from each other. The flip side to this, in my experience, would be that those same spaces were not always inclusive or open to the idea of any other quote unquote man dynamic outside of what they determined to be the acceptable man dynamic, which usually looked like heterosexual, cisgendered, and masculine presenting. Anything outside of that typically was questioned, dismissed, and often stigmatized. So with that in mind, I think my question to the panel as we start off would be, thinking beyond the barbershop and also within context, why is it important to have these discussions on sex, identity, and stigma? And I don't know if anyone wants to start now, or I can call. And yes, Michelle, they are way above $30. I saw $28 for a lineup the other day, and I went to Target to get my own shears.
I'm going to defer to my other panelists. I don't want to be the stereotypical cishet man who, rushes to speak.
The other side to it, if we can be transparent, is I was actually looking forward to you, Louis, starting this off, because this year and 2 years ago when we did this, you were the one who came up with not only the title, but the concept of having this conversation. So I think given that context, it would be appropriate for you to start. Don't worry, I think Isaiah and I, we can hold, and Terrell, we can hold our own if you go first.
Okay. I just wanted to put that out there. I'm really glad that we're having this conversation because I think a lot of things grieve my spirit about how we approach sex and sexuality in the Black community specifically. As a Black man, that's my point of reference in these conversations. And so as a cishet man who's been working in LGBTQ communities for, the past 13, 14, almost 14 years of my life, I've grown a lot in how I view sex and sexuality. And in that view, it's definitely heightened my understanding, it's heightened my perception of the culture that we live in. And so a lot of things now that didn't bother me or that once upon a time or that didn't really stand out to me once upon a time now really, really do stand out to me. So I remember, because I'm from New York City, but I'm based in Seattle now. And I remember when I started doing this work, I was at a research site in New York. And that was when I still had hair back in the day. And I would actually go to the barbershop to get my hair cut. and to be there and hear the conversations that were going on, it was almost a out of body experience, because half of me was, I mean, physically I was there, but mentally I was in another place. I was thinking about all my colleagues. I was thinking about the community, like the LGBTQ Black community has become a part of my community now. So being in spaces where I have to separate that, or where it's perceived as separate, really challenged me now. And that kind of had a ripple effect in terms of how I see other parts of me, other parts of our culture and identity. It's becoming harder and harder for me to kind of separate out that I'm supposed to be kind of code switching, and I'm supposed to be this way or present this way in cishet spaces, but I don't have to have these things on me in LGBTQ spaces. And that dynamic just really challenges me, as I'm sure it challenges many people, including our other speakers. And so I hope that somewhere in there was an answer to your question, Terrell.
Yeah, there was. And just to kind of echo more of what you're saying, I think when people discuss stigma, it's always just them talking from the context of just those 6 letters. There's not much intentional engagement regarding the other parts that are connected to stigma. So personally, when I think about stigma, I think of stigma as like the adjacent or even opposite to what faith is. So this idea of being assured, but also supported. And with that assurance and with that support comes a certain way we experience life, and that our hopes help influence positive emotions, and that can guide us or even just orient us into having more positive actions that we take that are meant for our own personal good. But stigma at its core, in my opinion, is about honestly disgrace. And with that disgrace comes negative emotions that influence negative thoughts, that lead to negative actions, that end up being discussions in public health in terms of, well, for this topic, men who are more vulnerable to suicide, or when we discuss higher rates of HIV or STI acquisition for certain male demographics, or even just talking about higher incarceration rates for men, where the idea is that disgrace is impeding our ability to function as a community.
I think the necessity around talking about these issues, first of all, they're very personal. In my own life, I have found myself grappling with, how should I say? I think first of all, again, I'm 55 years old, and looking in amazement at just how my own sexuality, and when I say sexuality, I mean really in terms of having sex, being sexual, is really powerful, really positive. And yet I don't hear other folks really talking publicly as much as I would like about that. You know, turning 50, and I'm going to say specifically, I don't know if we'll touch on this, outside of the kink community, outside of the leather community, you know, you have people freaky, you know, other gay/queer men like myself, as, you know, turning 30, turning 40, turning 50 as, you know, life moments to be feared. Oh my God, I'm getting older. Oh my God, I'm getting older. And I'm just like, baby boy, if you knew what I know now. But at the same time, again, finding myself having to really reassure people, you know, it's okay to grow older and be fine and be fab. In fact, it does get better. The other thing also is, and even as much as I'm very positive around my sexuality, growing older, there are other health issues for me that come along also that I have to reckon with as well. Like Lewis, I identify as cisgender and I also identify as masculine. And I often find myself saying two things. One, I wish we could have a conversation around masculinities, because I think for a lot of Black men, if you're not thug, street, or whatever, then somehow you're less than masculine. And I think to myself, that's, first of all, that's a generation shift, because once upon a time, you didn't want to be thug, you didn't want to be hood. So that was something that I had to look at in the circles that I travel around, you know, embracing transmasculine men, embracing my own attraction to transmasculine men, also kind of shaped and shook, as well as experiences that I allowed myself with other women, particularly cisgender women, kind of shifted my own thoughts around sex and sexuality. And then of course, the whole HIV piece. You know, it's like, you know, being what they would call a long-term survivor of HIV living with me, it's like I have all these thoughts. What does it also mean for me to embrace masculinity in circles that I travel in, where masculinity is suspect or automatically associated with toxic masculinity? Having to grapple with that and say, we can be masculine without being toxic masculine. But then how do we have those conversations? And then what does non-toxic masculinity look like? Because I'm going to tell you, and Lewis knows this, my best friend knows this too, Sunday mornings, I'm plopped in front of the TV watching football. And yes, shouting to the top of my voice when my team scores, or there's a theme, you know, or a call that I don't like. And then people are like, but you're gay, but you're queer. And I'm like, and what? I do know a thing or two about sports ball. Come on now. But again, and as funny as it may seem, that constant assault and question on who I am as a man, a masculine man, a gay/queer man, and I use those terms deliberately around my fluidity. And I think as Black men, it's significant because I think as Black men, regardless of how we embrace masculinity, and I'm going to say masculinities again, plural, I think as Black men, we are constantly under attack and under review and constantly having to question things that our white counterparts do not. So if I would have to say, that would be the significance. And we're not even talking about the ripple effect it has in public health, since Brother Zaya talked about wellness, and I want to add public health and wellness to that, and just the ripple effect it has around accessing or not accessing health for ourselves, and not just physical health. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, I mean, obviously all of my colleagues have no issue handling themselves and their perspectives and their viewpoints, which I appreciate. I've been sitting here kind of holding all those different realities and all those different expressions of why this is important to talk about. I think one of the focuses of sex and stigma mainly are there things that affect us that nobody seems to want to talk about, but they're in our everyday life. Everything is sexualized. Everything is hypersexualized. Folks are hypersexualized. Communities are hypersexualized. Kids are hypersexualized to the point that we're all dealing with sex constantly. People are sexualizing burgers and cars and people and parts, but nobody's having a conversation around sex. Nobody's having a conversation around advocating for yourself. No one's having a conversation around identifying healthy ways to begin to talk about these things generationally, because generationally, you don't talk about it. You have birds and bees, you have the stereotypical, we assume you're going to be having sex with this person, so this is what we're going to do. But if I don't know about you wanting to have sex with somebody of the same sex, and I don't condone that, or I don't agree with that, I'm not going to then support that by speaking about it. So I'm just not going to say anything. And when that happens, you perpetuate a culture of distrust of yourself and kind of trying to navigate or figure things out, because there isn't anybody to guide you or show you through that. And I think it's interesting, especially as Black men, the sexualization that happens of one's body, of one's mind, of one's spirit, prior to anybody ever actually having a conversation with you, knowing your name, talking to you. It's this immediate, I assume there's a stereotype here that may or may not be true, will or will not be confirmed, and that alone is enough for me to treat you a certain type of way or interact with you in a certain type of way. And noticing that as a person of trans experience, it's very, very interesting, because even if you didn't go into a perception or a setting with that ideal or that in mind, that often is when it's cast on you. It's very, very interesting. Do you or don't you have this? And based on that, will you or won't you be able to participate in this way with me? And can I fetishize that? And it goes both ways, as opposed to an actual genuine curiosity, not amongst bodies, but amongst minds. Like, okay, how do I bring pleasure to this person's body? That's not what's happening. The conversation is about, what can I get out of this experience? How can I do this in a way that is going to make sense for me? But like, what about the people that are there? So I feel like talking about sex and stigma go hand in hand, because the sex that you don't talk about often is the sex that is stigmatized.
Thank you all for that.
Can
I'm
I
hearing.
add real quick?
Oh yeah, go
Um,
right ahead.
I'm just really glad that we're bringing up all of these different facets of our life, because I think that a lot of this has been on my mind for a very long time. Like, when I think about my masculinity, and I appreciate Rod talking about the different types of masculinity, and people don't know this and about me, but I was a person growing up, because of like toxic masculinity, hyper masculinity. I grew up in like the hood in Harlem. So all of that was on full display when I was growing up in the 90s, if you're going to age me. I never saw myself as being very masculine as a result, because I would always put myself against the masculinity that I saw in my community, which was always, in my view, hyper masculine. So, and that usually meant that I had to be hyper aggressive, that I had to go out of the way to show dominance, for lack of a better term, in different areas in different ways. And I knew from a very young age that that just wasn't who I was. Like, I was a nice, light-skinned Black man. And I understood at a very young age that those things, and I say light skin specifically because I know that has something to do with how people see me and my masculinity as well. You know, it's very, very well documented at this point that light-skinned Black men are seen as quote unquote softer, quote unquote more feminine than more dark-skinned Black men. And so those were the things that I was navigating, you know, living in the projects, living in a community where I was also seen as very nerdy, very, you know, slight a figure. And so I knew that I could try to measure up to these expectations of masculinity that were around me. And these were the only examples of masculinity that I had. I didn't grow up in a household with a constant male figure. So the only view of masculinity I had was those men in my community. A lot of times it was the other boys that were in my community. And boys aren't good examples all the time for other boys. And so I had to kind of make a choice very early and say, am I going to be true to myself, or am I going to try to do my best to fit into these notions of masculinity that I see around me, even if they don't feel good? And I was the type of person where I knew I wasn't going to do well trying to fake it. Like, I knew that I was going to suffer more trying to fake it than trying to just be myself. And so what I planned to do actually was to be myself, but incorporate masculinity, or these ideals of masculinity, as I could. So people don't know this about me, but when you talk about football, Rod, I went out of my way to teach myself about football, because I went out of my way to teach myself about basketball, because I knew that these were common masculine traits. And then if I had them, then it would help me, or it would protect me when I needed protection, or it would just give me access. Really, I was thinking more about access to masculine spaces. And so these are things, and these things may sound pretty trivial to some of our audience who maybe don't have the same lived experience as me, but these things even though they happened to me at a young age, they really color my experiences with masculinity even to this day. And I will say, as Isaiah said, these things don't just pertain to how we are socialized, but it pertains to our relationships and how we carry these things into relationship, how we carry our masculinity into our relationship, into our sex lives, into our sexuality.
That is very interesting, Louis, that you could mention the idea of, forcing yourself to learn about sports just to kind of acclimate yourself in the idea of what you perceive the masculine culture to be. But I think that also speaks to the idea of a yearning for community, especially if that's the only community that at that moment we can see in front of us. I feel like I kind of echo that same experience from a young age, kind of wanting to learn more about football, but my attention span was not what it needed to be for that. So that was gone. But like as a younger person growing up in the South, and being someone who identifies as being non-binary, I do get questions like, well, how can you, say that, oh, you identify as being he, him, they, them. And I kind of have to break down a little bit like the core of like what being non-binary while still being a man means. I think some folks kind of have this idea of non-binary means that you are just, you're not assigning yourself to either a man or a woman in a sense, but that's not always the case. Sometimes it's a combination of both. Sometimes it's none. Sometimes it's a little bit of each. And I kind of feel like my upbringing was a little bit of what kind of sparked that. Because growing up in my household, I didn't have a male figure either. I grew up around a lot of women, but from what I learned or my experiences with those women, I was never really pressured to do certain things that would kind of tie to being like a man. And I think I was given a little bit of space kind of to explore, who I was in that forefront. I can only think of a couple of memories where I was at school and my mother came and I was playing dress up and she was like, oh no, take that off, we're not doing that. But on the other end of that, I remember my godfather signing me up to go to a religious basketball camp. And I was just like, please get me the hell out of here. And I remember coming back home from the first day and telling my mom, like, I don't want to go back. And there was no question about it as to why. There was no like encouragement to be like, oh, try it some more. She was just like, okay, it's done. Don't worry about it anymore. And I kind of feel like listening to everyone's discussions, there seems to be a lot of talk about, or at least a lot of evidence of such fluidity of what masculinity is. And I'm kind of interested in knowing more like, well, how do we define sexuality for Black men within the context of all these different experiences that you all are expressing right now?
I think the definition of sexuality for Black men is not a good one. I think what happens is, and again, I'm looking at this from a personal lens as well as a public health lens. I think a lot of times, and I'm going to say specifically within public health to help narrow it down a little bit, I think we are looked at as the problem, as opposed to inherently the solution. What do I mean by that? People hear me when I say I don't like the term MSM, which for those of you who don't know means men who have sex with men. And it's a blanket term that people use to talk about gay and bisexual men, particularly within the context of HIV and STI prevention services. I don't like the term MSM because it was a term back in the late 80s to early 90s when Black and brown folks were not getting funding for doing the same work in Black and brown communities that white folks in white agencies were getting for doing similar work in white communities. We came up with, and the question was around the term gay and bisexual. So the term MSM was created to say there are men who don't identify with those terms or are still engaging in behaviors that put them at risk for HIV or make them vulnerable, for HIV and STI infection. So as a result, we never thought of that, dollars. But I think what that did though, was that it particularly, because no one calls white men MSMs, but I think what it did was it really had us look, and still has us look at Black men in particular as somehow problematic, as in MSM. Okay, well, these are men who don't identify. Well, they're hard to reach, or something is wrong with them that they don't, or something is inherent that they don't identify, and so they're at risk, more at risk sexually and otherwise than their white counterparts. And the reason why, and that's what, when you listen to the conversations around MSM, this is what comes up. No one asks, well, what's going on culturally that men like myself may not identify? People don't ask that question. It's very easy to pathologize Black men. And I'm only saying Black men specifically here for this conversation. And so therefore, and people will say, people will hear me say, no, let's call it for what it is, gay or bisexual. Maybe even same gender loving, which is a term that many of us like to use. Same gender loving, queer, gay, bisexual, which gives a cultural context in which why these identities are so important. But I think there is a tendency for Black men to be demonized around sexuality. When you've looked at, when I've looked at particularly public figures, Black male public figures who have been disgraced, 9 times out of 10, there's some sexual scandal, from Michael Jackson to Michael Jordan, to name Andrew Gillum, our brother who was running for governor. It usually is around our sexuality. We're often talked about in terms of, in terms of public health, in terms of, and even recently, there was someone who came into the clinic that I do some work at, who consistently brings his female partners in for testing along with himself. The conversation went like this. Oh, well, do you think at some point he'll slow down? Nah, probably won't slow him down. He'll just have, and what, his birthday's coming up too? Oh, he'll just go on overdrive. And then I had to stop us. And it's like, why are we talking about another Black man like this? Does he not have the right to be, to be sexually active with as many women as he wants to? Are we offering him PrEP? Are we talking about ways where we can support him being sexual as he wants to be, while still keeping him safe, as opposed to by default, looking at his sexuality and his sexual activity as somehow inherently wrong? So yeah, and that to me is an example that we often view Black male sex and sexuality as problematic, as opposed, even more so than our white counterparts. And I think that's why the work that Lewis and I do around sex positivity is so key, because one of the things we're also clear about is hypersexuality is not the same as sex positivity. Those are two very different things. And thank you, Brother Isaiah, for bringing that up. That being hypersexual does not mean you're sex positive, because we can be playing out this very same scripts that Lewis spoke to, for example, and not even realize it. So let me step back.
Lewis or Isaiah, do you have any comments?
I think one of the things I'd like to add about Black male sexuality is that it's varied, and oftentimes those variances are not accounted for. A lot of folks don't feel that especially, and I mean, when we look at the history of sex in this country, and then we look at the history of sex as it pertains to Black folks in this country, we can't talk about it without talking about slavery. We can't talk about it without talking about rape. We can't talk about it without talking about control, manipulation, murder. There's a lot of things that happened that are influencing the way that Black men see their sexuality and interact with their own sexuality. If that means that is their attraction, whoever that's towards, there's layers to that. if that's men, if that's women, if that's all people, because it can be varied, a lot of folks don't speak to it because the idea of hypermasculinity in this country is that men want to have sex with women. And if you do not want to have sex with a woman, you are not a man. And that alone is stigmatizing so many people that younger would have expressed being able to say and be and act as they are if it were going to be accepted. But we all know they're not going to play with the punk. They're not going to play with the sissy. They're not going to play with the pansy. They're not going to play with the nigga they know they can push around. And if that ends up happening, and we assume that you have any type of sugar in your take, we assume you're any type of weakling, we assume you're any type of feminine, we assume you're any of these things, you are not allowed in the club. And what's funny about that is, as somebody who particularly personifies themselves as a gentleman, a lot of the things I do, people are going to look at me, oh, you're a square. You don't do these, you don't say these things, you don't act in this. I don't feel, that's not natural to me. It's not comfortable to me to call women bitches. It's not comfortable to me to demean other people as a form of dominance. It's not comfortable to me to do these things. Yet that's supposed to be a rite of passage in some weird fucked up way, excuse my language, but it's just like, how am I supposed to engage myself if all of you don't even know how to engage yourselves? What are we supposed to be saying? By nature of my transness, I'm able to choose my masculinity. A lot of us are born into it and absorb it as though, okay, these are the reins of my life. And it's like, put it down. No one told you had to do that or did that. Or did you feel pressure to consume it in an effort to try to be safe, but that never kept you safe. It kept you secure for the time being, but the insecurities festered, the insecurities built, the insecurities managed, and they couldn't manage because you couldn't be honest. You couldn't say, I like men and women. I don't know who I like. I'm exploring what that looks like for me. I don't know what I like in bed. I want to see what that feels like. I don't know what I like in romance. I want to see what that feels like, whoever it comes from. There isn't a comfort from that. There isn't and those conversations aren't had. A lot of Black dads are not having conversations with their Black sons about, son, it's okay. No matter who you like, the conversation we need to have is about how to keep your body sexually safe and how to keep you in line with what sex is. Sex is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be pleasurable. It's supposed to be this display of affection. It's supposed to be the connection that you have with it, but you need to understand how to go about getting it. That's not what we're talking about. If you don't want to fuck so-and-so, guess what? I don't want to hear about it, because you doing that, I don't want to know. So don't ask, don't tell. And that's often a policy in a lot of households. If you are not doing what I think you should be, we're not talking about it. And oftentimes in Black households, that goes without saying in many, many generations. And it's that generational trauma or that generational curse, I feel, that as we continue to perpetuate those cycles, interrupting them and disrupting them looks like not only starting these conversations young, but starting these conversations with other cishet counterparts, with the dominant culture, because me talking to other folks in my community about it, we get it. I'm preaching to the choir, but talking to other folks that do not know about this, the first time they've had that conversation, it won't be the last. Because if I pissed you off, if you got annoyed about what I said, if it made sense to you, it clicked, it resonated. So either way, there's going to be something you carry with it. And I think that's the point of it all, is to not figure out where everybody should be, but to have indifference no longer be the reason we care not to know.
Isaiah is just all up in everything that I want to say. I really appreciate all your comments just now. Like, you just spoke my whole life. All I want to say is just to foot stomp that point, as they say in the military. Foot stomp the point about sex as a form of sexual expression, of self-expression. I think that when we talk about sexuality of Black men, we are so policed in our sexuality. And by police, I mean that we try to maintain control of Black men's sexuality. And we do it with Black women too. But for this conversation, I'm just going to speak about Black men. The policing that we do around sex and sexuality of Black men, around sexual expression. Because one thing we don't really, as men, I don't think talk about, and I'll say this as a cishet man, we don't talk about sex being a form of sexual expression, of self-expression. Like, sex shouldn't be the same thing for everybody. And I feel like when it comes to Black men, especially cishet Black men, it's really dick and pussy. Like, that is what we define as sex, is dick and pussy. And sex, I mean, we police Black men to the point where if a Black man moans a certain way, we start to question their sexuality. or their sexual preferences, and not really understanding that everybody's different. Everybody's allowed to enjoy sex differently. Everybody's allowed to pursue sex in different ways. And it doesn't have to compromise, or it shouldn't compromise you in your sexuality if you like sex in a way that is outside of the way we police sex. So we can talk, I mean, and we can get into it. We can talk about things like pegging. We can talk about things like just oral sex in general. Like sometimes there's just weird energy around, even if it's oral sex of a man giving oral pleasure to a woman, and cis man giving oral pleasure to a cis woman. Like it becomes this, sometimes even that becomes this debatable thing, or if you should do it and if it's nasty and this and that, not really understanding like it's just sexuality, it's just sexual expression. There's ways that you can be safe in how you go about doing and about how you go about practicing sex and sexuality. But that's the same thing with everything. Like there's a safe way to build a house and there's a very unsafe way to build a house. So it really is just about us taking ownership of our sexuality and our sexual expression and being willing to be ourselves and not let society just ruin our ability to express who we are. Isaiah, I see you got comments.
Yeah, Louis, I was just going to add to the end part of what you were saying fairly quickly is that the reason that it's wild to think about it, but the reason that someone would question and or look at another man differently based on the way that he moans, it's not because of the sex that he's having. It's because now that he moaned this way, this dictates how I should treat him. And people don't realize that's not like the form of your varied experiences should not be allowed to be dictated by those that are deciding how to treat you based on how that experience goes. So if I hit on you and you don't accept it, you don't like it back, oh, he must be this. No, I just didn't appreciate that. Like I didn't like that. I don't have to accept that as a form of treatment solely because that's supposed to validate my masculinity. So yeah, I just feel it's very interesting in that way where folks will use things to try to dictate their treatment of people, not necessarily validating their existence as a human one. So that's I feel it's really important.
I also think inherently, Black men individually and collectively, we're very fluid. Even if you look at this panel, and I'm including you, Terrell, we are very diverse in terms of how we identify in terms of our gender, in terms of how we identify in terms of our sexuality, our sexual identity, that is. I think even in terms of what we might enjoy, there's some diverse tastes up in here as well. I think Black men are inherently fluid, but I also think that we are, for a variety of reasons. We don't, and I'm going to quote something that Onyx Mid-Atlantic, the chapter I co-founded of Onyx, that we like to say, we don't always give ourselves permission to really be fully who we are. And there are reasons for that. There is danger in terms of not only from outside our communities, but even within our communities. Homophobia, misogyny. I don't like the term sexism all the time because at the root of sexism is misogyny, hatred, and despising of women. A friend of mine also uses the term homomesia, which again is very similar in terms of hatred of anything that even has a whiff of the homoerotic or the gay. And then when we talk about bisexuality, and I don't like how bisexuality, particularly when we talk about HIV, how it's put bisexuality within men, not within women, but within men, is positioned as you are the vector that passes by the virus from gay people to straight people. And that is a very damning and also a false way of looking at bisexuality. And yet, when it comes to people talking about the down low as an example, oh, these low down low, and Negroes who don't want to be open about who they are. But yet at the same time, when someone does come out, even Issa Rae in Insecure, I got to bring this in, when she says, why can't a man just explore sexuality without automatically being gay? And I think she makes an important point that we don't allow for that fluidity. We don't allow for that culturally, for that exploration. And we pay a price for not allowing, and in this case, I'm going to say Black men, to be fully who we are, regardless of our gender identity, regardless of our sexual identity, also in terms of what we like sexually. I'm even, as we're talking, I'm thinking back to Tank. First of all, he's fine as fuck. Excuse my language, but he is fine as fuck. But what I love about Brother Tank is that even in talking about his music and how erotic his music is, he used that as a platform to talk about, hey, there are things that I like to do that I think as straight men, we need to talk about. He's like, I love eating ass. I like getting my ass eaten. And the blowback that he got from that, I'm like, but I watch straight porn too. I know what you guys get into. Why are we mad at Brother Tank for being open? And mind you, and that's even among straight folks, that there's all this cultural taboos about, not being honest about what we really like. And then when you add someone like me, who's gay/queer, and it's like, well, let me tell you what I like to do. And then it's like, but no one has a problem with people doing it, but we have a problem around talking about it and around being honest. And I'm just like, why? And not even questioning the silence. So if there's anything that I'm concerned about is, why are we fronting? Why are we fronting? Why are we just not being honest? It's 2022. We're having these conversations around gender and gender identity that is wonderfully shaking us up to really think and rethink some things. We need that same kind of conversation around sex and sexuality. Because there's a lot of stuff we're doing that we're not talking about. And I'm going to step back because I see Lewis, I see my brothers want to share some stuff too. Come on, in the room.
Just really quickly, you bring up bisexuality, and I'm so glad you did, because let's also put out there that there is a constant pushback that bisexuality doesn't exist, or bisexual people don't even exist. So the fact that, and it's weird to me that we have this notion that there's no such thing as authentic bisexuality, which still floats out there in Black communities and other communities all across the world. So there's that, but then when someone is pointed out as possibly being bisexual, they're demonized, or it's weaponized against them, because they're seen as a vector of disease. So there's just one of the many things that grieves me. But the other thing that comes to mind, and I always like to share this story, is, I remember being in Black churches and hearing Black women get up and give testimony about how they were at one time with other women, and the Lord delivered them, and they're championed, and as these virtuous people that have overcome, and they gain status because of it. And if they have a partner now, or that's male, then it's seen as just a phase. But I've seen Black men get up and give that same testimony, and they're labeled for life. And it tends to be the case that they lose status. And it's not even that they're bisexual and they maintain that label. It's just that they're gay. They're gay. They're always going to be gay, because you have touched the man once in life. You are gay, and you can be nothing else. And so it's just something that I always reflect on, and how rigid we paint sexuality for Black men, and give so little leeway of what sexuality can be for a man, or how we can even think about sexuality for men.
Thank you. I was trying to put in the chat, the idea of once a man has been with another man, they're labeled for life, and how that's kind of our own community's one drop rule, in a sense. Like, once you got a little bit of a taste, that's it, and you're done. And I've been hearing a lot from you all regarding your thoughts, which, correct me if I'm wrong, kind of stems from the idea of like heterosexual engagements and kind of understanding and exploring sexuality from a cishet kind of standard. But I kind of want to hear more regarding conversations that may be still needed even on the queer same gender loving side, because I do think there are conversations that are lacking, especially from my own personal experience, hearing even SGL men talking about how they don't want to be with a bisexual man, or it's speaking about how they view or want to be with trans men or trans women and what that's like. So I'm interested in hearing more context about that with you all at this time too.
The reason why I identify as gay/queer is because I've always recognized, even as I was coming into my own sexual identity, that while my strongest sexual attractions are for other cisgender men, and definitely my romantic, I would say my romantic interest is pretty much 99 to 100% for other cisgender men, I've also recognized that I have had attractions to other individuals, to other humans who were not cisgender or men or male. I've had sex and play with cisgender women. I've had sex and play with transgender men and play, as in kink play, with transgender women as well as with non-gender conforming and non-binary individuals as well. And the reason why I put queer, and I have to be honest, I'm of that generation that did not like the term queer because we only saw the negative connotation in it. But what I like about the term queer, and I never thought that in my 50s I would embrace that term, but I embrace it because I think it opens the door for conversations from at least in folks in my generation to say, what do you mean by that? What do you mean queer? And it gives me a chance to talk about my own sexual fluidity. And it's very interesting because for someone who's identified as gay for so long, a lot of people don't think that I would be interested in exploring other options. I think people kind of are interested when it's straight men who are like, I would, at least in the circles that I run into, straight men exploring their options. Oh, wow. They may even be championed or dare I say, fetishized around that. Whereas someone like me who's been identifying as gay for so long, then it's like, what? Really? But again, at 50, I was turning 50 when I went to a queer party, a queer sex and play party that a friend of mine was throwing. And I told her where I was at, that I wanted to give myself permission, that I didn't want to feel constrained with just having this gay identity, that I felt like in being honest, the same honesty I talked about earlier, and it's like, no, I've always wanted to express and explore. And she said, baby boy, I am throwing a party. This would be perfect for you. Come to it. And I made, and again, because I was turning 50, I didn't give a damn. I was like, look, I'm gonna let everybody know what I'm here for and what I want. And you know, the whole thing around ask for what you want because you just might get it. Baby, I got it that night in spades, everything I want. And I was just like, why don't we, and I'm going to say here as Black men, why don't we just give ourselves permission to really explore and give ourselves the space to be and to do what we want to do. Those spaces are liberating. Those spaces are also terrifying because they fly in the face of everything, you know, that you were taught in school, that you were taught in family, not just from the men in your life, but the women too. For those of us like myself who not only were church brought up, but also I was in ministry for many years. So everything you've been taught, being honest also means flying in the face of everything we had been taught to be and do. So I think queer, going back to your question, queer has allowed me to defy any and all expectations and to say, there's more to, don't let the smooth taste fool you. There's more to me than meets the eye.
I see that we're getting like comments and hands raised from the audience, which is really cool. It looks like the audience is ready to jump into the conversation. Before we get to that, I just want to make a quick comment. As the cishet man that's a part of this group, I want to say unequivocally that trans women are absolutely beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. Trans men are too. But but when it comes to the attraction that I feel, I think trans women are just absolutely gorgeous. And I don't have any problems with saying that. If that makes me trans attracted, then so be it. I don't have any problems with being labeled trans attracted because I don't feel like what I use for attraction and sex and sexuality, it doesn't change when somebody is trans. So like if I see a beautiful woman walking around, like if I see Naomi Campbell walking down the street, Naomi Campbell is a objectively, I should say, beautiful woman. She's one of the most gorgeous Black women that I've ever seen in my lifetime. And my wife knows this. And so if I see Naomi Campbell, all of these things in my head just start to click because I'm attracted to Naomi Campbell, and I think that she's just beautiful. I always have. When I see a beautiful trans woman, the same apparatus that would attract me to Naomi Campbell is attracting me to that trans woman. Like I'm not looking for the fact that somebody is trans. I'm just looking for a beautiful woman. And trans women are beautiful women. And so I don't have any problems with that because I'm not doing anything that I haven't done all of my life when I see a beautiful trans woman. So I just want to put that out there. I know that cishet men don't really show up for trans women like we should, but I just want to give that today that, you know, trans women are beautiful and we need to respect them as such. And I don't think this notion that, you know, Black men, especially cishet Black men, should have some qualms about being attracted to a trans woman. It just doesn't make any sense. You're using the same things that are happening to you internally that would attract you to a cisgender woman are the same things that attract you to a beautiful trans woman. So I'll just put that out there. And we're getting a lot of hands now. So Terrell, I'll give it to you to sort out.
I'm going to let Isaiah speak, and then we can start addressing some of the comments with respect to the time.
Perfect. Y'all, I had to write down some notes because there was too many thoughts I was having. A couple of pieces I wanted to touch on. That piece about trans women being gorgeous, very, very true. Solely because of the fact that your beauty does not define your treatment, whether you're gorgeous or not, you still deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. And one of those things that's interesting is that something that plays into that beauty, that gorgeousness that folks talk about is also this idea of deceit. A lot of people feel like I didn't know I was this, blah, blah, blah. No, what you were attracted to is what you went after. You were not deceived. What you understood is what you went for. Now, the conversation or the notion that folks are going after trans women for something specific, no, there are some people that pursue trans women for one thing and one thing only. And so there's an element of the conversation where folks need to be honest about their sexualities and where they want to explore. There's a lot of men who want to explore with another penis, but will not do so if it's attached to another man. And in their minds, some people are able to validate that by experimenting with trans women, and often in very, very harmful, very abusive, very dangerous ways. And that costs people their lives. Under the mask of the guys, I didn't know. No, you knew. And what you decided to do was continue anyway. And when you felt like you were going to get caught, so there's something to find out because you were not sure of what you wanted to do, you then felt scared. And out of that, you acted. There are still in very many states a trans reactionary law where if you act in violence towards a trans person and someone ends up dying or someone ends up hurt as a result of it, this person can walk away saying, I was scared. It's a trans panic law. I got scared. They're trans. I hurt them. That's not what happened. But often it's allowed to be perpetuated and permeate a lot of communities, which is why there are folks that don't ever see an active trial date because someone just erased it. It didn't happen. They got scared, they panicked, they hurt you. There's a law. So now what? And that often justifies a lot of the harm that we see under the layer of deceit, which is often not true. One of the things I think also people don't realize, labels are for other people. Being same gender loving, being Black and queer, being all these things, these may be serving for us, but they're how to identify ourselves to other people. We've made an entire community being LGBTQIA plus elemental P, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That whole thing was made so that we can identify ourselves to other people. That was not made for me. I don't care. I know what I like. I know what I want. I know what I want to do. That was not made for me. So the idea that people are trying to force us into identifying, think about who that's for. The next time you identify yourself to other people, think about who that's for and how you're identifying yourself and what you're saying and how you're prioritizing the language you're using to describe what dynamic you want to exist in that room. I think there's a difference between a freedom from and a freedom to. There's a lot of people that want freedom to do something. A lot of folks don't realize Black folks exist in a lot of freedoms from. I'm trying to be free from oppression. I'm trying to be free and get to liberation. I'm trying to be free from isms. I'm trying to be free from all these things that are holding me in a way. But freedom to is something a lot of white folks experience. Freedom to move about, freedom to be as they please, freedom to go where they want. There's that existence without a question. And so when it comes to accessing and gaining access and knowledge into different queer communities and different lenses, one of those things that's important are you asking someone whether they want the freedom to express themselves or the freedom from not being able to express themselves? Because implying knowing that you know how to do that, you have to do the work in order to understand. You haven't been taught how to do that. You have to figure that out. This culture in our society has never, ever taught us how to do that. It's just taught us it's there. Maybe you'd want to experience it. And I think our Blackness, in a lot of ways, people don't think afford us a lot of privileges, but I'd argue that beyond that, it actually offers us a lot of expressionary, like liberation and culturally like freeing moments where that Blackness is not a monolith and neither is the sexuality that comes with it. So there's so many different ways to experience sex beyond penetration. And I feel like that's what our generation and our generations have focused on so heavily, that the intimacy, that the eroticism, that the desire, that all these things that also are a part of that don't ever come into play as importance, because those things aren't supposed to matter to men. That's not supposed to matter to you. The intimacy, the foreplay, all this stuff is supposed to be off to the side. You're supposed to want the penetration and to leave. You're supposed to not know what to do with the clitoris. You're supposed to not know what to do with all these things. And it's like, wait, what if that's not my experience? What if I want a different experience with you? And how often do we lend ourselves to defining each experience with that individual partner, as opposed to perpetuating, well, I think I like missionary, let's just do that. I've seen porn, okay. I think I've heard this is what guys are supposed to do, let's do that. No, what do I like to do? How do I want to explore? What is it? How is this important to me? And am I more than just dick to somebody? Am I more than just this attachment, this piece, this appendage? Is there any fruit for the other side, the feelings on this end of the equation? And those feelings are allowed to happen as well. So it's just this moment where being like, no, there's a lot of conversation to be had, more than just penetration, more than who's doing who's doing what, where. It's about beyond that, culturally, you're reconnecting across each other and saying like, okay, we all have sex. How do we want to come together and have those habits, create a culturally healthy way to support ourselves?
Ooh, I need to get a collection plate going after that good word, because there was a lot of truth to that. I'm looking at time and we are slowly approaching, but I want us to still be able to address a couple of our attendees' comments. So Michelle, I see you have your hands up. Did you have a comment you wanted to push forward for us?
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate you. Isaiah, I appreciate what you just said. It hits a lot of buttons. For myself, I don't like being referred to as cis. I swear, I just don't. I just want to be a woman. Just refer to me as a woman. I don't want to be cis anything. I can be your sister, but I don't want to be referred to as cis. You know, and I just don't like that cis thing. Now I do ask about pronouns because I want to be respectful of others' pronouns. You know, I want to be respectful of others. So I will ask about pronouns to find out how they want to be addressed. But Michelle is fine with me. Michelle, being a Black woman, is fine with me. But that cis part, that just kind of works with me. I don't know. I just can't get with that yet. I swear I can't. And I know what the what the books say about it and all of that, but it just doesn't really work for me. I accept it because if people feel more comfortable saying it, hey, it's okay. At least you know you're not being disrespectful. You're just reading, you're seeing what you have read, and you go by that. And but I do want to know about what Ramona has stated about, should trans women be proud that they can be just objectified as a cis woman? Can somebody explain that one to me? Okay, come on, Rod.
Two things. I want to tread carefully on this because I am not a trans woman. My thoughts is that, first of all, to say that a trans woman or any woman is beautiful on its surface in and of itself, I don't think is objectifying. Now, if the only reason you're saying someone is attractive or you want to engage with them is only because they are transgender, then I think we might be getting into objectification territory. But if you are attracted to a woman and put it this way, and you find out, or you know she is transgender, and you're like, that's fine. I think she's beautiful anyway, or I think she's beautiful, period, which would even be better. I don't think that's objectifying. And again, I'm saying, and I think it also goes to, and it's funny, Michelle, you talked about the cisgender piece. Kudos, first of all, for saying that doesn't work for me, and you can only own your truth. I find cisgender helpful in understanding that when I'm in a space or a place where there's more than one gender identity and gender expression, then I'm clear that ordinarily I don't refer to myself as cisgender, but in some situations I will, as in this one, because I'm clear I'm coming at a certain perspective as a person who is not of trans experience. So, and with that, that's why I would say, I think Lewis or anyone saying that they find a trans woman, and I'm also going to include trans men, because within the gay male community, we're facing a similar conversation, how to express our trans attraction without objectifying, because this is some new territory for many of us. But on the surface, I think, again, someone saying that a man or a woman of trans experience, if they find them attractive, at least on the surface immediately, is not objectification. And I'd welcome to hear other perspectives as well.
Okay, we're going to, Isaiah, did you want to speak? Sorry.
Yeah, just quick to that point. I don't feel that any woman wants to be objectified, and objectification does not serve as a form of validation for trans women, neither does it for cis women. But I think no trans woman would be proud to be objectified in a way that other cis women are. But I feel like there's a sense of affirmation folks feel when that goes into like passability and that goes into like safety. And so when someone is being perceived as their gender, that does feel good, but it would not feel good if it's happening in a predatory way.
All right, and I also want to let Bonnie, I see you had your hand up for a while as well. Did you have a question for our panel?
I had a comment, mostly a comment and a question. I mean, I think this this dialogue unpacks a lot, and I wish we had more time. I mean, this could be a conference in itself, to be honest. Okay. I guess as a community health educator, I'm wondering where we start to have these, and I use basic, not to say that it's any of it's basic, but just the start of conversations in our communities with individuals that we're working with about some of these issues. Because, you know, as Black people, there is a lot, there's a lot to unpack about sex and sexuality. And I was just on a session earlier where they were talking about, you know, it was the Black HIV work group, and it was about stigma. And I asked the question, I mean, men on the download, that's a stigma in itself because it's tied to a stereotype and misinformation. But how do we start these conversations to get around and end the misinformation that's out there that basically is informing our younger generations, and as well as just people in general, you know? So
I have some comments. I feel like Black people always talk about sex, to be honest. I feel like we don't always talk about it in healthy ways, but
well, I mean, like in healthy ways. I mean, we do talk about sex.
I'm getting there. But
Okay.
I feel like when I go on social media, like my Instagram feed is full of Black people doing all sorts of things, saying all sorts of crazy stuff around sex. I mean, anytime, what was it, Jesse L. Williams? He just had a show where on Broadway where he was nude and it got leaked, and the people were going crazy talking about this man's anatomy and everything. So there's capacity for our community to talk about sex. We just don't organize, or we don't do it in an organized, healthy space. You know, we're fine with talking about somebody's dick size when a dick pic gets leaked. We're fine with talking about, you know, the size of, you know, how well Megan Thee Stallion can twerk, and, you know, somebody's sex tape that got leaked, or, you know, how good somebody can give head when that video gets leaked. But we don't organize spaces where we can just talk about our own sexuality, our views of sexuality in healthy spaces. So I think we have the capacity to do it, just nobody gets us together, and nobody's creating these spaces. And when I do see these spaces created, they're usually for pockets of our community. So I've seen spaces for same-gender loving men to talk about sexuality. I've seen a few spaces for trans men, trans individuals in general to talk about sexuality. Very few spaces I've seen for cishet men to come around and talk about sexuality as a group together. And I've seen almost no spaces where we do this across our respective identities. So I think anybody who has intention about creating more sex positivity and more positivity around sexuality in the Black community, I think it should start with creating those spaces. I think there's value in having them individually for different segments or different pockets of our community, definitely, but also having intentions to create spaces like this where we can come together and talk, so that we have cis men talking to trans men, talking to same gender loving men, and really hashing out what's going on between us. So we're not just these unknown quantities to each other, but we see each other as a unified community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we are at 3:28, so about 2 more minutes before the next session begins. So I think at this point, if you do have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to our panel via the WOVA app, and I'm sure they'll be glad to engage with you all on that platform as well. I want to thank all of our panelists for being present and providing their unique perspectives in terms of how we can create a more sexually liberated community for our brothers that are out there, and how we can confront and really change the stigmas that exist regarding sex and gender topics out there. So once again, thank you all attendees for being here during this session. And also thank you to Howard University, the COVID Vaccine Prevention Network, the HIV Vaccine Trials Network for such an amazing opportunity to share with you all today. Please have a safe upcoming holiday and a wonderful rest of your conference time. And take care.
Rod and I put our emails in the chat, by the way, for those who want to get in contact with us outside of the conference app. So thank you, everyone. Really appreciate you all joining the space. Thank you to my fellow speakers, by the way, for getting in.
You're welcome, and thank you.
So I feel like Azai is the real MVP coming in the clutch.
Y'all, thank you so much. We appreciate the time and the conversation.
Yeah, appreciate you.